We've talked about Les Paul's rarest guitars, his weirdest guitars. Today we're talking about his favorite guitars. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Les preferred to have a ridiculously clean tone, so he ended up falling in love with low impedance pickups, which after many prototyping phases, he developed a new signature model in the late 60s. Now they went by 3 different names. There's a Les Paul Personal, the Les Paul Professional, and then it was finally referred to as the Les Paul Recording. And there were a few other ones from there that we'll run into tonight. But let's start with this freaky thing. That's right, Les Paul did have an SG in his collection. It's an original 1961 that he just completely modified to have his new low impedance electronics. This is before those models we were just talking about. So it's always cool when one of Les Paul's hacked up guitars show up, because they usually have some very interesting stuff on them. Like our headstock, it hasn't changed too much. You've got the Grover tuners. Of course, he signed it on the back of the headstock. But a thing that Les liked to do was talk to his audience while he played the guitar. So he would have a mic jack on the side of some of his guitars. As far as production runs go, you would only find that in the Personal model. At this auction, it brought $43,750, although I'm unsure if that includes the 25% buyer's premium. Next up, another personally modified Les Paul Custom this time. The listing simply calls it 1950s, and since it was probably originally black and got refinished to this white finish, we can't actually tell any further than that, because it's very doubtful that the pots are still original on this. But generally speaking, in the 50s, you would only find black finished customs. But this one has been outfitted with his favorite pickups. It's got a Bigsby B7 on it and a whole bunch of other fancy controls. Looks like a more modern truss rod cover. Here's a good look at the microphone plug-in spot. It's even locking. I really like this pickguard. It matches so beautifully with the finish. From far away, you can hardly even tell it's there, but that's because the guitar had to be extensively routed underneath that. And the interior of the backplate is actually etched to my idol, refretted by Danny Gatton and Rob Weaver, July 9, 1976. But according to the listing, there's also slips of paper dating from 1997 through 2006. So this was definitely a project, and it sold for $75,000. Our next 2 guitars were sold as a pair in this auction. Probably not the best way to ship these things around or store them. So it's presumed that these might have been prototype models for the original Les Paul Recording and the Triumph bass. So you can tell he was really going to modify the whole layout of the guitar potentially to get all the fancy electronics that he was looking for, but yet he still wanted all the fancy appointments of the headstock to stay about the same. If we can believe the note on the side of the case, they called them Les Paul Juniors, 1967, so that would be slightly before they came out with his other models, but it is listed as a prototype right here. Personally, I'm glad they refined it further than this, because let's face it, the Personal, Professional, and Recording models really aren't that popular to begin with, so if they looked goofy like this bean and kept this vibrola style, they probably wouldn't have been that much more popular. However, the original designs are ridiculously heavy, so maybe these would have been better, who knows. But very cool to see a Triumph bass in this version. I almost think the bass pulls this off a little bit better. I'd be curious to see if they had more controls in here or less. But speaking of less, here you go. You can have a picture of him holding them. And seeing it at this angle, I don't know, maybe it does work a little bit better. It's very Fender-esque having a pickguard everywhere. What's sad is I want to see the back of the body. It probably doesn't have any routes at all, but we only have these photos to go off of. Surprisingly, the set sells for $40,000. I would have imagined that would have went for more, because that's only $20,000 a pop for really late 60s prototypes. I bet those would be worth more if they came to market today, because our next one sells for nearly $200,000. So we talked about this one in our first episode, about how it was listed as maybe the very first prototype of one ever made. No, I've received some other messages confirming my thoughts that this is a early 80s one, and I think somebody told me it was created in 1982, but you see him use this a lot after that point. It is probably the most beautiful version, and that's probably why he put his pulverizer on it so he could show it off. It's basically just an 80s take on what they could have offered, which I think maybe could have sold a bit better because they don't have the giant plate over here. Our next one sold for about $70,000 and has a handwritten card on it reading, "Reward. This is property of Les Paul." Probably means it was pretty special to him, but it's another white Les Paul custom, kind of like what we saw, but a little bit more expertly done. We don't have the giant additional pick guard, so maybe this actually left the factory looking closer to this. However, I do not know that at all, because there's no serial number outside of Les's signature. and I don't claim to be an expert on his particular guitars. This one does not look quite as chopped up as some of his other ones that we'll see later tonight. Did you know that there's actually an acoustic Les Paul model? No, not that one. I'm talking an actual acoustic. This is called the Les Paul Jumbo. It's part of the low impedance series. Yes, it existed. Not a lot of people know about it. Not a lot of people care. It's relatively rare, but how many people truly want to own it? Not that many, but I would not mind documenting one eventually. This particular one sold for 30 grand, which is a lot more than usual. And then here we have just one of the regular professionals. I would imagine this might have been an earlier one, or one that played pretty good. I mean, it's got some minor cracking in it, so it must have got some use, but not good enough to get a signature. But even though these normally sell for well under $5,000, this one brought 11. An old friend of Les reached out to me via email saying he would buy up a bunch of these old low impedance guitars for Les between like $1,500 and $1,800. And they were essentially gifts to him that he had just given to him a few years prior. So some of these guitars he didn't really have like his whole entire life like I was initially thinking. He just acquired them as he went, and then yeah, his estate really cashed out on some of these. So the next portion of this episode are the really crazy modified ones. We've seen some of that, but I would consider what we just looked at the more iconic. Late 70s Gibson Les Paul recording model. This one brought $24,000, which is absolutely insane. This time we can see it's some sort of a cherry sunburst. You don't see that with the recordings too often. They're always a walnut brown. Towards the later part of 1970, you start to see some more exotic colors. But he's got a whole bunch of different switches. He's got his favorite mods as we've been talking about. This time we've got a harmonica bridge with our low impedance pickups. But what's cool about this one is it's based on like a Les Paul Standard and or a Les Paul Deluxe. And this started life as a bargain guitar. He either bought at one point in time or he went to the factory and he's like, oh, this is a bargain one? Sure, I'll take that thing home. Hack it up, make a new player. So there we go. It's got a pancake body construction, so that tells us anywhere between 1969 and approximately 1976. We don't have any photos of the back of the neck, so we can't date it any further than that. However, it definitely looks mid-70s-ish to me. But whoa, what's going on with that? That's a little bit different. But our next one went for 50 grand. It's another cherry sunburst, but this time almost looks like it left the factory like that, right? Outside of maybe these two. He must have really liked those chicken head selectors. It really helped him know where he was going. But okay, it's the real low impedance pickups that Gibson made because it's got the embossing. Look at that, no binding. The original 1952s, first batch of them didn't have binding, so maybe that was a Les Paul thing. But we're definitely more so towards mid to late 70s with that headstock style, but we still had the pancake body, and it was definitely hacked up for that. Wow, that's a really big volute. And we can see some of the controls. This personal went for $12,000. How cool would that be to have Les Paul's personal Les Paul personal? So this is the one I was talking about earlier that has the jack from the factory and the additional volume control so you can help tame that. But this one has a Bigsby, but it doesn't look like it left the factory with that. Although some of them did. I actually do have one of these in my collection. It's one of the cleanest ones I've seen, but I've been waiting to find the right gooseneck microphone before I make that review and demo. These guitars certainly are not for everyone, but I see what Les wanted out of them. Here's just a regular base model recording. Looks like it was pretty beat up. Maybe it was a gift to him, maybe it wasn't. Doesn't really seem to have too much of a detailed history, but it still brought in good money. The next is a Les Paul Triumph bass, but what's special about this particular one is it has a note attached that reads, "This is a Les Paul bass, low impedance pickups. Against my wishes, the Gibson president would not make it lighter." And he really believes that this could have been a winner if it could have been designed a little bit better as far as the weight goes. What's really cool about these to me is the fact that they have primarily black binding. You don't see that as often in Gibsons at this point in time. I mean, even look here, it's got a double layer of binding, so black and cream on your fretboard. You don't really see anybody ever use the Les Paul recording model Triumph basses ever. It's probably because they're too heavy. Next up, we have a white Les Paul recording. Oddly, looks like our Gibson logo was covered up by someone. That seems to be legit. White was a rarer color on these, but you did find it in the later 70s, but this one looks a little bit earlier than that. Must be really heavy to underline it twice. But what I always love about these is the fact that they have black binding. This later influenced a small run of Les Paul Artisans that have the white finish and black binding too. This one was played at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. It's another cherry sunburst. This next one went for $24,000. Again, modified for the microphone. Otherwise, besides the bridge, seems relatively stock, besides having some notes from Les, which is what people are paying for. Here's another mid-70s one, this time in the ebony finish. Looks pretty sweet with the gold hardware. But hey, here we go, a new model. This one went for $14. This is technically a Les Paul. I reviewed quite a few of these and I absolutely love it. They had changed the low impedance pickups in these, so they're not the big oblong ovals. They're more rectangular, and these things just sound phenomenal clean. I do highly suggest them. This is not just a niche piece. In fact, it's my favorite of all the Les Paul signature guitars, as far as the low impedance models go. I need to get one back in my collection. They're just a pain to work on when something goes wrong. Next up for $30,000 is another white one, but this time from 1976. Signed by him, and it got spared. He was getting ready to route it for the microphone, but didn't quite get there. But man, I love the side profile shots of the ones with the ebony binding. It just looks so good. There was also another one of these Les Paul signatures. There was also a bass version that Jack Cassidy made pretty famous. Next one's a 20 grand later 70s version. You can check out this video right here where I tell you all about the detailed history, but there's like 3 different versions of the Les Paul recording. There's the early one, mid-series, and then the late series. The late series introduces the maple top. And the body dimensions change, if I remember correctly. The layout of the knobs, like this one has a couple of additional things added on top of that. And of course, what he normally does. This one is from 1978. But hey, now look at this one. It sold for $30,000. I wonder if this is an early prototype or just one that he modified, because this has the usual oblong-shaped ones. I've never seen that on one of these Les Paul signatures. And judging by the fact that it says Les Paul model, yeah, that definitely makes me think early production. Oh, there we go. Labeled proto by the man himself. So we can 100% say it, and I'm so glad they redesigned those cream pickups and their bezels. That's actually really cool. Definitely worth what somebody paid. Bear with me as we go through all these. I just want to show you how much less like these low impedance pickup equipped guitars. He's got so many. So here's another one of the Les Paul recording basses. This one went for about $30,000. It's one of the late series one, this time in a walnut finish. You don't find that color as often in the later runs. This color looks way different in the later runs because of the maple top we were just talking about. But again, you get the black binding signed by Les Paul, all that good stuff. This next one has been modified a little bit. You see, it looks like somebody had some other pickups in it at one point in time. They moved our tailpiece back. This one is a professional. So it's kind of that weird teenage model between the personal and what became the recording. People modify them to have humbuckers and then they're kind of fun. They're not that good because they're ridiculously heavy. Mine was 13.5 pounds. This one for $8,000. It was just a little bit different. It looks like a regular Les Paul standard that got highly modified, potentially by the man himself. Custom-made Les Paul recording truss rod cover. Nah, interesting. Refretted, potentially no binding, and or it was just painted over. I mean, there were just tons of these style of guitars in this auction, and they all sold for very good money. But hey, there we go. I guess now that I think about it, maybe this is why they redesigned the Les Paul signature bass. They wanted it to be lighter, they just had to change everything about it by making it a semi-hollow. I've never actually tried one of these. And then our last low impedance pickup guitar tonight is fake. The real one is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that tells me he loaned out a guitar that he really liked to the Hall of Fame, but since he still wanted one similar to that, just because it says fake doesn't mean this is a fake Les Paul. It still looks like a real standard. It's just been heavily modified to look like the one that's in the Hall of Fame. Somebody still picked it up for a little over 10 grand. So we've talked about some of the prototypes and some of his other weirdly modified guitars. The last segment in tonight's episode are the ones that he didn't quite finish. And this one has experimental wooden pickup covers. And man, it's a shame that we don't have more than 2 photos on this one, so excuse the blurriness as we go in here. Those pickups are gigantic. I wonder how those differed from the originals. Sadly, without notes, we probably just won't know. Unless there's more info in his autobiography. I can kind of see how that one sold for 20 grand because there's a little bit of mystery there. But our next one is a poor Les Paul standard. It sold for $6,000, but it's been chopped up very similarly for those giant low impedance pickups, which this is not uncommon to find underneath Les's pick guards that he puts on many of them. But he's got a unique bridge system as well. It almost looks like he had a B-bender or something on it. Here's a 79 standard that went for a little over $5,000. This one relatively tame within the modifications, outside of a couple fancy coil splits, his usual preferred knob style, and whatever this is doing. It looks like maybe there's a piezo pickup on it at some point in time, so he had to carve away the bottom portion of the pickup ring. And here's a quick look at some of the electronics. So up until this point, we've seen a lot of 60s and 70s modified things. This one is supposedly from 1995. He was still tinkering around. Now, miraculously, it doesn't look like he routed it for too much more. Those still look like humbucker routes to me. We've got a Bigsby on it now. He was probably just playing with other pickups. Something definitely strange going on with our headstock. And ooh, nice, the good version of the Gibson Sonics case. It's got the double neck rest and the case pocket. I'm kind of surprised they estimated that one to be so low. This is another one I find really fascinating. So it's a 35th anniversary Les Paul custom that appears to have just left the factory completely unfinished. It doesn't have the final sanding or finish put over top of it. It's just the regular headstock veneer. But he had to have swiped this out of the factory and said, hey, don't worry about routing pickups. I'll do it. Because it's dual single coil humbucker routed. Then it's got some other testing clips on it yet. I think it'd be really cool to finish this one because technically that's its original form. It hasn't had a color yet, so you could make it your own HSS Bigsby equipped Les Paul. And it'd be part of the 35th anniversary series. I'm really curious what happened to a lot of these projects. What did people do with it? Are they brazen enough to finish it and make it their own? Or when you pay this much, is it better to leave it as kind of a collectible? Because wow, he took that even before the serial number was put on it. But that makes it a late 80s model. Here's another Les Paul recording with who knows what horrors underneath it, but it's got gold hardware. Ooh, wow, that's nice. He's got his nickname on a Lifton style case. That's pretty cool. Then he even had a really fancy L5 in his collection that went for 20 grand. This photo tells you just about everything you need to know. As far as what he was trying to do, oh man, he just literally chopped the fretboard to put his preferred low impedance pickup on it, and just left everything else the way it was. Still has the cool headstock. Stinger on the back for good measure, seal fast style tuners with our 3-piece maple neck, and he cut a giant hole out of the back. You won't find many people brave enough to do that today. Check this one out, it appears to be a recording husk. Doesn't appear to have been super modified, so somebody could have bought this and made their own guitar. In fact, it's really fun when you buy a recording instrument and somebody's converted it from the low impedance pickups to the high impedance like we're used to on most of them. They can kind of be fun guitars. Trust me, to restore one of these, it takes a long time to find the right parts. But that one brought $5,000. Look at this poor studio. Oh boy. Yep, low impedance route and looks like a single coil with that. He was just gonna hide it all with a pickguard if he ever got done, but this is an early studio model. It almost looks like he was making one of the Acoustic Sonics before those things existed. But that is indeed a maple neck before they put the Gibson veneer on it. And nice, it's got a serial number, dating it to 89. So that means that's a regular mahogany body. First 2 years of studios have alder though. But check out this flat top acoustic. I wonder if this came before the Les Paul Jumbo or after. I mean, I can tell you this guitar right here came before, but I don't know when he happened to have gotten this one. Reminds me of the John Lennon guitar. But hey, this one brought 40 grand. Looks like some sort of a Les Paul Standard or a Deluxe to me. And then, of course, we've got all the other pickups. Definitely been refinished. Our next one, according to Paul's son, he used this to record the album Chester and Lester, which is kind of a big deal. And lastly, just a nice 1978 with the maple top, but this time with a nickel Bigsby. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Les Paul's favorite guitars and enjoyed our little series of looking through most of his instruments. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get to like all the standards or all the studios, but I tried to highlight the things that were most important. But maybe another day we'll circle back and talk about the other ones. Because with over 750 items auctioned, I probably missed a couple of cool ones. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.